In the last two episodes, we had an overview of the history of guitar distortion and fuzz guitar, from the origins in the 50s to 1968. If you missed BTR number 29, BTR number 30, I warmly suggest to check them out, so to start from the beginning. This is the third and last chunk of our time travel through the evolution of the fuzz rock from a technical, historical and cultural point of view. We're about to review the years from the late 1960s to the end of the era of vintage fuzz in the mid-70s, the years when flare jeans or bell-bottoms were a big hype. Germanium transistors remained the standard in the electronics industry of the 1960s. They are extremely susceptible to temperature variations
and is also tested to measure stability under various temperature changes.
It seems even that Hendrix, during sound checks, carefully tested a few fuzz phase pedals to find out which one was sounding the best in that specific environment. I used to dub them the moody transistors. Towards the end of the 60s, the industry was shifting from germanium transistors to the more compact, consistent and reliable silicon transistors. Most fuzz boxes on the market underwent this transformation process. A few examples are the Fuzz Face, the Most Right Fuzz Right, and the Maestro Fuzz Tone, which came in a new version marked FZ1B with two silicon transistors. Silicon fuzz pedals have slightly more gain and high-end frequencies. Sound-wise, many players generally tend to favor the germanium, even though it's out of question that there are a lot of great-sounding silicon fuzzes. Between 1968 and 1969, two more seminal fuzz rock masterpieces were released. The Iron Butterfly from California released the heavy psychedelic rock album In-A-Gadda Da Vida. The Stooges, featuring Iggy Pop, came out with their radical debut album celebrated as predecessors of the punk rock of the following decade. The guitar players of both bands, Eric Brann of the Iron Butterfly and Ron Ashton of the Stooges, shaped their tone with a Most Right Fuzz Right. A Fuzz Right is also what Ennio Morricone relied upon for the evocative power of the theme of Once Upon a Time in the West, C'era una volta il West. Interestingly, at least 4 session guitar players claimed that they played the most important guitar parts for Sergio Leone's soundtracks, to the point that the controversy ended up in a legal dispute. 1969 was also the year of the historic debut on vinyl of the Led Zeppelin. In the album reigns supreme the Sola-Sound tone bender Mark II Professional, which Jimmy Page used since his days with the Yardbirds in 1966. A new generation of fuzz pedals came from the East. The talented Japanese engineer Fumio Mieda of Shinai designed the versatile and malleable FY6 and the more raced FY2. The 6-transistor FY6 was originally produced by the short-lived brand Hanei and later under the brand Univox with the famous name of Super Fuzz. Following the Octavia by Roger Mayer, the Super Fuzz combines fuzz with overtones and octave effects. The 2-transistor FY2 was introduced on the market under the brand's Shinai Companion. It's a fuzz pedal both caustic and fascinating. Shinai had a confusing trade policy, and their pedals were on the market under a load of brand names. Companion, Apollo, Shaftesbury, Mika, Hohner, Jax, Kimbera, Kent, Crown, Mayfair, Taisco and Royal are only a few examples of pedals that shared the same exact circuit from Shinai. Pete Townshend of The Who used a Super Fuzz FY6 for about 10 years since the late 60s. That's the period of the Woodstock Festival and the album live at Leeds, when he was using an SG Special. In those days, Fender dove into the market of fuzz, producing their appreciated Blender, quite similar to the Univox Super Fuzz and, consequently, to Roger Mayer's Octavia. The Fender Blender was my first distortion pedal. I found one used for cheap back in the late 80s. A year later, I bought my first vintage guitar, a Beat 1967 Telecaster. This is what I found inside the control cavity. The previous owner had installed this tangle of wire with a couple of transistors, a 9-volt battery connector and a switch. This is exactly how Norman Greenbaum describes the fuzz circuit he had installed inside his Telecaster Custom. With his hot-rodded Tele, Greenbaum obtained a very distinctive fuzz sound, and in January 1970 he released the hit single Spirit in the Sky, recently defined by Rolling Stone magazine, an immortal fuzz rock anthem. Mosrite also produced a rebranded version of the Fuzzrite for Guild. It came under the name Foxy Lady Fuzz, obviously to capitalize on the Hendrix phenomenon. When Mosrite went out of business, Guild commissioned the production of a new fuzz pedal to the young and promising technician Mike Matthews. Matthews gradually developed a successful new concept of fuzz, eventually culminating with the introduction of the Big Muff Pi, branded by his own company, Electro Harmonix. The Big Muff pedal is sonically considered the link between the fuzz of the 60s and the more modern op-amp distortion of the following decades. That's the beginning of a whole new chapter in the history of fuzz, so we will deal with the Big Muff more in depth in the future. Among the great masters of fuzz guitar of the 70s, we can't fail to mention the great Mick Ronson. It came to its full artistic maturity as band leader of David Bowie's Spiders from Mars. He used to plug his loyal Les Paul Custom with the top finish stripped off in a solo sound tone bender Mark I filtered with a Vox Wah pedal. The footage of Bowie's concert at London's Hammersmith Odeon in 1973 documents the intensity of his fiery performances, especially the uncut version of the original bootleg release. Going into the 1970s, many players gradually started to consider fuzz pedals technically obsolete and artistically old-fashioned. More practical and flexible ways to achieve guitar distortion began to gain popularity. Op-amp overdrive pedals arrived on the market, emulating tube-like distortion with a convincing realism. The amplifiers started to include a master volume control or fancy multi-channel switching, allowing high-gain tube-driven lead tones at more reasonable levels. But in spite of the general trend, the fuzz never quite left the scene. The Cramps created new music styles such as psychobilly and voodoo rock. With the waltz of fuzz guitar by Brian Gregory and later Kid Congo Powers, the Cramps anticipated the neo-psychedelic and garage punk rock of the following years. Flag bearers of the revived garage punk of the 80s were Rudy Protrudi's Fuzz Tones, and I guess their name says it all. We find some excellent examples of fuzz guitar also in the British new wave of the early 80s, like the album Thirst by Adrian Newton's Clock DVA.
The Jesus and Mary Chain.
In the mid-1980s, the Jesus and Mary Chain from London buried their pop songs under a blanket of FY2 fuzz. In those same years, an Australian band from Melbourne named The Scientists meant serious business. Their fuzz-soaked guitars sounded like a wrecking ball. Starting from the 90s, the fuzz tone even started a whole new cycle of life, which is still going, even with the likes of mainstream players such as Joe Bonamassa or Eric Johnson. Bottom line, so does speaking of fuzz pedals still make sense in the era of digital profiling amplifiers and effects processors? Does it still make sense to care about the raunchy farting tone of those simple old circuits with 2 or 3 transistors? We've heard the most unsuitable or impractical mosquito-like tones coming from those pedals. We've seen those rusty dented beaters being sold off, given away, lost or damaged. Yet, in these last 3 episodes, we rediscovered so many cool sounds. Some of the most remarkable pages in the history of music were written with fuzz guitars. Which brings us to the conclusion that it's definitely worth having a fuzz in our pedal board. A good fuzz pedal should be almost treated like a distinct instrument of its own. It requires practice to manage and time to experiment with different settings and combinations. The fuzz is an awkward effect. Pedals guru Mike Analogman warns, a fuzz is not an easy pedal to get a great sound out of. If you have unfit or inappropriate gear, don't expect to buy a fuzz face and sound like Jimi Hendrix. Playing style or settings affect dramatically the performance of a fuzz tone. It can behave in a whole different way depending on the other elements of your signal chain or on the order of your pedal board. Don't let yourself down if the first strokes don't sound good. When used well, a fuzz box can deliver amazing textured soundscapes. Fuzz pedals are worth experimenting. They may just fit your music and playing style better than you think. Please make sure you subscribe to the BTR channel and click the bell to keep posted. Thank you for helping our community of guitar friends growing. Feedback, support, and each of your comments help the BTR channel to keep going. Please feel free to join our Facebook group and visit us on Instagram.